Managing your business finances can feel overwhelming, but a well-crafted financial budget is the foundation for staying profitable and in control. And it's not just a spreadsheet, it's a strategic tool for building a profitable, sustainable business. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to build a financial budget step by step so you can confidently plan your revenue, expenses, and profit, and finally take control of your finances. And to make it even easier for you, I've included a free financial budget template that includes both your financial budget and your cash flow plan in one place. And you can download it using the link in the description below and start planning towards your profit goal today. So let's dive in. This video is going to walk you step by step through how to build out your financial budget for your business. There's 6 steps to building out your financial budget. Step 1 is to set your profit goal. Step 2 is to define your chart of accounts. 3 is to draft your revenue plan. 4 is to draft your cost of goods sold plan. 5 is to draft your overhead plan. And 6 is to refine and adjust. And I'll dive into each of these steps in more detail as we go along. Okay, so step 1 is to set your profit goal. Your budget is really designed to be both a guide and roadmap towards a meaningful profit goal. And just some reflection you can do to refine or validate this number is to ask yourself, what net profit figure do you want your business to achieve this year? Why is that particular number important to you? And how does achieving this net profit goal align with your longer term business goals and personal aspirations? Let's say, as an example, we're aiming to achieve a net profit goal of $300,000. So that's step 1. It's pretty self-explanatory. Step 2 is to define your chart of accounts. So a chart of accounts is essentially an organization's financial tool that provides you with a complete listing of every account in your accounting system. An account is essentially a line item for each type of revenue or expense on your budget. And if you're already using an accounting software like QuickBooks or Xero, and you're happy with the P&L chart of account line items that you're currently using, then you can just plug those ones in here into the budget. First of all, you'll want to define your revenue line items. It's important to have a line item for each specific type of revenue. So when determining what revenue categories to utilize, consider factors like significantly different types of client, sales processes, job sizes, and conversion rates. So you don't want to have so many revenue categories that your budgeting becomes overly complex and the information just isn't the most helpful for decision-making purposes. And then on the other side, you don't want to have too few revenue line items where your budget is overly simplified and you just throw everything into one category, unless you truly only have one revenue stream right now. I'm going to use as an example a painting company. And so if I'm using this example, I might separate out all of the revenue for the painting company into 3 revenue streams. So commercial revenue, strata revenue, and residential revenue. So you'll want to figure out what the right revenue categories are for you. And then you can go on to make separate accounts for each cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold are the costs directly attributed to the production of your service. So the most common are going to be direct labor and direct materials. Direct labor includes any employee or contractor work that's directly contributing to the production of a product or the delivery of a service. Then we have direct materials, so any materials or supplies that are used in the production of a product or delivery of a service. Once you've determined that, then you move on to making a separate account for each overhead line item. These would be expenses that often don't fluctuate with changes in production levels. So for example, rent, vehicle and equipment expenses, insurance, salaries, advertising. And so I've created a list of common line items in this budget here that you can build off of, but you're going to want to tailor it to your own business. So that's step 2, defining your chart of accounts. Step 3 is to draft your revenue plan. We're going to begin by entering all the data from your last fiscal year into column E of the budget. And this is going to give us a foundation for your new fiscal year planning. I would suggest just taking the time up front to do this for your entire budget in one go. So I'll show you an example here. So you can see here that I've gone ahead and filled in an example of last year's actual results. So you just input last fiscal year's revenue, cost of goods sold, and overhead expenses into each of the line items here. And this will give you a clear picture of how the business did last year financially per line item, which is going to help us project this upcoming year. So you're going to start by reflecting on last year's data And looking at how much revenue did it take to earn the net profit goal that you achieved last year? And then looking at your current year's net profit goal, asking yourself, how much additional revenue would you need to achieve the net profit goal that you've set for this year? As you're creating your revenue plan, just make sure you're being logical and realistic with your financial planning, taking into account market dynamics, your company's operational capacity, and the overall industry environment, as well taking into account things like seasonality. And then ask yourself how much revenue growth is realistically attainable, and do you have the people and overhead in place to realistically achieve this goal? And then coming up with your first cut revenue plan. As I mentioned, refinement and adjustments will be made as you progress through building out the budgets. We just want to get the first iteration down to work off of. And we're aiming to achieve a net profit goal of 300,000. So I will take a moment here to plug in an example. I've plugged in my first cut revenue plan for each revenue category. And we'll see if we need to make any tweaks to this as we go along. So that's the first cut revenue plan. Now we're going to draft our first cut cost of goods sold plan. And when it comes to planning your cost of goods sold, since cost of goods sold is typically made up of variable expenses that go up and down in correlation with your revenue, I would suggest looking at the actual total percentages of total revenue for each of your cost of goods sold line items for your last fiscal year. If we start with the percentages from last year, let's just do a quick calculation. So last year, it looks like direct staff labor was 20% of revenue, direct contract labor was 10%, and direct materials was 10%. But figure out what your baseline you're going to work off is going to be in terms of historical percentages of revenue per cost of goods sold line item. And then you're going to adjust this baseline considering any anticipated changes. If you're expecting that there's going to be an increase in wages, a material price fluctuation, any variability in staff quality or experience, or if there's going to be an upcoming change in the percentage of labor that's coming from contractors versus employees, or perhaps you've implemented some new systems that's going to positively influence your productivity or material usage in your product or service delivery. Take any of these things into account looking ahead for planning next year. And through that, you're going to come up with your planned cost of goods sold percentages per line item. Let's just say that I know there's going to be a wage increase, and I feel that direct staff labor is going to end up at the end of the year at 22%. Let's say contract labor, I'm confident it's going to stay steady at around 10%. And then let's just say with direct materials, we've recently had a price change from our suppliers, so feeling like this is going to end at 9%. These numbers are going to auto-populate based on you plugging in your planned percentages of revenue for each line item. And that's how you figure out your first cut plan for cost of goods sold. It's really just plugging in your projections for these percentages here, and it's going to divide this percentage by total revenue to give you your cost of goods sold line item. That's step 4. And then step 5 is to draft your overhead plan. You're going to start by, again, analyzing data from the previous fiscal year to determine your current spending on each expense. We've already plugged in last year's actuals and using that as a baseline to determine how much you think you'll be spending this year. So looking at what you spent last year and then determining, are there any reasons why it would increase or decrease this year? Would it be similar? Are certain overhead line items going to have to go up in order to support your new goals that you've set for your business, or based on any other knowledge or factors that you have? You would use that to set your first cut projections. And I'll just make a comment here about staff salaries. So you'll see that there's direct staff labor up here. And so the difference here is that the direct staff labor included in cost of goods sold, this is labor that is directly contributing to the product or service delivery. So in my painting business example, this would be the actual field staff. This would be the painters on site doing the work. Whereas staff salaries would be any staff where their work is not directly contributing to your product or service delivery. So in the painting company example, this might be my manager's salary. It may be an admin assistant. And then you can see salaries can be broken up further if you have a sales team that are earning salary and commission, then the salary portion would go here under sales. And if you have any employees or contractors that are in marketing roles, then they may fall under one of these categories. And so you're going to go through each line item one at a time and ask yourself how much is required to spend on this line item to support the budgeted sales revenue, as well as how much is required to spend on this line item to align with and execute my strategic plan. And then by addressing these questions and just looking at the current trend of how much you spent last year, then you'll be able to better determine the minimum expenditures for each line item and how each line item aligns with your overall strategy. So I will take a moment here to plug in an example. So here we go. Now I've updated my overhead plan to create my first cut version of my projections of where each line item is going to land by the end of the fiscal year. So you can see I've done that for normal overhead, sales, and marketing expenses as well. So now we have our first cut budget created with revenue, cost of goods sold, and overhead expenses. So the final step is to refine and adjust. I like to think of my budget as a puzzle. So each line item represents a piece that might need adjustment to ensure that the entire picture comes together seamlessly. So what you're going to want to do is look at your budget and specifically, based on everything you plugged in, does it actually hit your profit goal? And does everything feel realistic? And then you may need to adjust things until everything fits together perfectly and you have an aligned plan towards your net profit goal. So let's look at this example. So we plugged in our first cut revenue, cost of goods sold, and overhead plans. However, as a reminder, our net profit goal is $300,000. Or after plugging in all the numbers for our best guess for each aspect of our budget, it's popping out a net profit projection of $208,000. So we'd actually miss our net profit goal by just over $90,000. And this is not uncommon that you'll create your first cut plans for each aspect of the budget and it doesn't align with your net profit goal right away. So we need to strategically look at what adjustments can we make that are actually realistic. When it comes to financial planning, we do want to put our conservative CFO hat on. We don't want to just be pie in the sky and adjust numbers that we don't actually believe we have the team and overhead in place to hit. But we want to look at what can we do to perhaps adjust some things to make sure we hit our profit goal, assuming we execute on our plan. So there's 3 different aspects that we can look at to make these adjustments, or we can do a combination of the 3, which is most likely what we would do. So the first thing we can look at is what level of increase in revenue would we need to achieve to hit our net profit goal if all else stayed the same. In this case, I've already done the math in advance, but we would need to generate about $150,000 of extra revenue to hit the goal. So that's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is become more efficient with our product or service delivery. And what that looks like is reducing our cost of goods sold percentage of revenue. So we would look at what would need to shift cost of goods sold wise if all else stayed equal to hit our goal. To make an extra $90,000 of profit, we would need to reduce our cost of goods sold by around 6.5%. So that will be a pretty significant decrease in cost of goods sold. And we need to figure out a way to become more efficient without quality suffering. So assuming you are already fairly efficient, it would likely be pretty hard to make up 6.5% just through increasing efficiency without raising your overall prices, which is something you can consider. So that's another way, is to become more efficient with your cost of goods sold. And then we can play with the final one. The final thing we can look at is what can we do regarding lowering our overhead expenses, typical operational expenses, sales expenses, and marketing expenses to be able to make up that $90,000. Essentially, in this case, if all else stayed equal, we would need to reduce our overhead by $90,000. If we were to do it this way, we'd go line item by line item to determine if it's possible to reduce the expense while still hitting our revenue goal without quality suffering. But are there areas we could shave off some of our overhead? So normally you go line item by line item. I'm not going to do that right now just for the sake of time, but let's just see what we can do here. So perhaps we look at staff salaries and maybe we decide that we're going to hold off on making a certain hire this year. Perhaps we cut $10,000 off of training and development, and maybe we feel we can still hit our revenue with a bit less ad spend. That's an example of what you would do to try and reduce your overhead in order to get closer to your profit goal. So as you can see, those are the different avenues that we can manipulate in order to get our plan to align with our profit goal. I was showing you each one individually to show you what would need to happen in that one section and all else stayed equal. But what would more likely happen is you would utilize a combination of all three. However, there may be a situation where no matter what you do in terms of manipulating the revenue, cost of goods sold, percentages, and overhead expenses, you're just not able to create a realistic plan that achieves your profit goal. And if that's the case, then you may need to revisit your strategic plan and either adjust your overall strategy, whether that's adjusting your marketing and sales strategy so that you are able to hit a higher revenue number. It could be raising prices. You may decide that you need to focus more attention on a specific revenue stream that's more profitable than others. Or in some cases, you may need to actually adjust your net profit goal. And perhaps you realize that for this upcoming year, based on your current team and resources, that it just isn't realistic to hit $300,000 profit this year. And perhaps you need to adjust it to say $250,000. And just because you need to lower your profit goal in order to create a solid conservative plan doesn't mean that you're limited to it. You can always hit it and then keep going and exceed it. So that's what you would do to refine and adjust until the puzzle pieces fit together. In the upcoming videos, we'll talk about how to utilize this budget to conduct financial trends and build out your cash flow plan. Okay, so now that you know how to build your financial budget, don't forget to download your free financial budget template using the link in the description below. It's designed to simplify your budgeting process with both a financial budget and cash flow plan to help you confidently achieve your profit goal this year. And I'll also be releasing more videos to help you grow and scale your business, so make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. And I'll see you over in the next one.